Hello everyone and welcome back to All About F1 with me, Steph. I'm so glad to have you here with me today. We are going to be talking about the fact that F1 appears to be a very, very global sport on the surface, but it's actually not as global as we think it is. We as a sport travel all around the globe for all of our races. We go to the four corners, we go to majority of the continents, 5 of the 7 continents we go to. So that's quite a lot. And we have drivers that come from all different countries of the world. This is not a sport that is concentrated in one specific location. Or is it? So this topic and concept and idea has been playing on my mind for a while now about the globality of F1 and whether it truly is the global sport that it says it is. Let's start by taking a look at the drivers. And if you saw my last video about my fantasy teams, you will know that there are 5 drivers on the grid who are from countries other than Europe, which means that 15 of the 20 drivers that we have on the grid right now come from Europe, race under European flag. That excludes Nikita Mazepin, who kind of races under that neutral flag. But apart from that, they are all very European. They race under European flags. They were born in Europe. They raced in Europe. Everything was very European centered for these other 15 drivers. So our 5 other drivers on the grid, we have 2 Canadians, we have Lance Stroll and Nicholas Latifi, we have Sergio Perez, who is from Mexico, Yuki Tsunoda, who is from Japan, and Daniel Ricciardo, who is from Australia. You know, we hear so much about how if you live outside of Europe, you have to move to Europe in order to be able to get into karting, get into single-seaters, and that's kind of where it's at. We know that Senna moved to Europe to start his career. Daniel Ricciardo, most recently, was kind of moving from all the way in Australia to Italy, you know, to race. It is very much, you have to be in Europe if you want to get into this sport, and that's kind of why we probably see more Europeans feeding into Formula One than we see outside of Europe. Yuki being a Japanese driver, he is one of the first Japanese drivers we've had in several years. We don't tend to see very many Mexican drivers. Canadians are not that prominent either. So when we look at Formula One and the history of Formula One, it's very, very European centered. You know, we have a lot of winners from Germany. We have a lot of winners from Finland. We have winners from the UK. We have a lot of winners that are from Europe, basically. That's the point I'm trying to make. And we don't really see that many drivers feeding in from outside of Europe. But it's a very, very interesting concept because we think that there are drivers from all of these different countries when really the majority of the drivers come from this tiny, tiny little continent of Europe. And fair enough, it is pretty populated, but it's definitely not as populated as some of the other continents in the world. So it's very, very strange that we have such a heavy European focus in terms of the drivers and their flags and nationalities. But it's also very not strange when you look at the history of Formula One and how it evolves. So now let's have a look at the circuits that we race on, because this is also a very, very interesting point. We have 23 races scheduled for the 2021 season, which is the most we've ever had. However, 12 of those races are in Europe. So Europe, being such a small continent and being such a small part of the globe, actually hosts over half of the races, which contextually doesn't make sense because, you know, we have massive countries in Asia and we have loads of people over there, so surely it would make sense to have some more races with them. And we have tons of people on the Americas. Why do we not just put a couple more races over there rather than having half of the races for the entire championship concentrated in Europe? The European leg in Formula One definitely makes up a good 2, 3, 4 months, including the summer break. So we do stay in Europe for a long period of time, and it does make it easier for transportation and just kind of a nice leg of the championship to kind of be in one place rather than jetting off left, right and centre. I know that I am someone who has talked a lot about Formula One and its emissions and choosing to go from Australia to the other side of the world, back to Japan, to Canada, to Austria, and just kind of jumping all over. And it makes sense that Formula One has this massive concentrated bit of its season in Europe so that we don't have to do those massive long haul flights trying to go to different races. So as this video is progressing, we are seeing that Formula One is very European based. And now I'm going to look at where the teams are all based, because some of them, yes, you could say they're international. I think McLaren is owned by a company in Bahrain. Haas is obviously American. Racing Point / Aston Martin have a Canadian owner. So they are very international teams when you think about it. But When you get to talking about where the teams are based, lo and behold, we have 7 of the teams that are based in the UK, and the other 3 teams are based in Italy, so still very European focused. Again, this makes a lot of sense, especially because half of the races are in Europe, and Europe is a great central hub to getting to other places. If you are in Europe and most of the teams are kind of based down south, great connections to airports for travelling to and from different races. You're right in the middle of it, you're in the hub, whereas if Haas were to have a base in the United States where Formula One is not as massive, then it would make their life a little bit more difficult. And finally, I just wanted to look a little bit at the history of championships, because Formula One has evolved a lot. This final point, I guess you could say, is in favour of Formula One's globality and how global Formula One actually claims itself to be. The first championship that we had in 1950, all of the races were in Europe, apart from the Indy 500, which was interestingly included in some Formula One seasons, not included in others, but that was part of the championship, and that was the only race that was outside of Europe. And it wasn't until years later that we started branching out, and we went to Morocco, South Africa, another US track. Then we finally got races in Canada, Japan, Brazil. You know, we really got these big races, but at the beginning it was a European championship. So this is why it makes so much sense that everything is so European in Formula One, and it's not something that you necessarily realise until you look properly. It's all well and good. We start the season in Australia and then we finish the season in Abu Dhabi, and those are 2 different continents and neither of them are on Europe, so of course Formula One appears to be very, very global. This might not seem like the biggest issue that we have in Formula One, and it definitely isn't, but it shows and it demonstrates that the majority of the opportunities for young karters and young racers are in Europe, and it's going to be extremely difficult to fall into Formula One if you are from the Americas or if you are from Asia, because you don't have those direct links to Europe where it's all going on. I would like to point out that I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing that Formula One is really European based. I think it's very difficult to have a completely global sport, and the only one that I could think of is football. Everybody knows how to play football, everybody knows the basic rules, and the World Cup is honestly one of the most global sports that you could possibly think of. Even in the Olympics, you don't have every single country that's good at every sport, whereas every single country basically has a football team and everyone knows how to get involved with that. Whereas it's much more difficult when you think about it in a Formula One sense. Formula One just isn't as accessible as football. You just need a ball. Whereas with Formula One, you need all of this equipment to be able to get in. You need the opportunity. It requires a lot of funding. It requires facilities, when not every country has that in the world. So it makes sense that Europe, which is one of the most expensive yet technologically advanced continents, would have all of these opportunities for young racers and young karters, which is why we see a massive stream of European racers making it into Formula One and less so from outside of Europe. It's interesting to think about how European-based Formula One is now, but when you look at how far we've come and how many races we've added, we look at how Formula One is becoming much more inclusive in terms of where we're going and in terms of the people that are coming into the sport. This is a really interesting concept for me, and I'm really proud of how far Formula One has come in expanding itself into a global sport. But we still definitely have a long way to go to ensure that everybody has those same opportunities, and so that we can start moving away from having all of these races in Europe. But that is the end of this video today, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please leave it a like down below and subscribe if you have not already, because it helps me out very, very much. So thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!